What's going on, everybody? Let me turn that music down. How's it going? Happy Sunday. It is January 9th, 2022, and I did go live a little bit earlier than usual. Let me turn down the intensity of those lights behind me a little bit. I did go live a little bit earlier than usual, and that's on purpose because I'm broadcasting to Facebook and LinkedIn at the same time as Twitch, and I wanted to just double check that we weren't going to have any technical problems with the stream. So those are live. I see that I'm live on Facebook. I think I'm live on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm live on LinkedIn. So if you're watching on Facebook and you're watching on LinkedIn, you can absolutely drop me questions on those platforms. If you do want to interact live where you see your question show up in this panel right here to my right on the left side of the panel, you will have to come to Twitch. And so you can go to twitch.tv/IanDouglas736 and you can make a free account over there. Anything you add in chat will show up in this window over here. But otherwise, if you just want to drop a comment on LinkedIn or a comment on Facebook, I will see those as we go. It may take me a minute to kind of notice those because I got screens all around me now. But I did want to broadcast to more platforms at the same time. So tonight I was going to do just kind of a live Q&A session and go through a whole bunch of questions that people have been submitting to me on LinkedIn, on Quora, on Twitter around career prep and interview preparation. And I wanted to address a bunch of those questions because they've been queued up for a number of weeks now. I didn't stream much over the holidays, and so I need to get caught up on some of these questions that people have been waiting for answers. And so I thought I would go live just a little bit early, just in case there were any technical problems. But it looks like it is streaming okay. Let me just double check the audio. I think the audio is coming through okay on LinkedIn. And let me double check on Facebook. The audio is coming through fine on Facebook. A little curious whether the audio is coming through on LinkedIn or not. I actually don't hear the audio on LinkedIn. So if you happen to be on LinkedIn and you're watching this live, can you just throw a comment on there and let me know that you can hear the audio okay? There should be some music playing in the background as well as my voice. So if you can just drop me a note in LinkedIn and let me know that that's working okay over there, that you can at least hear the audio, that would be a big help. Because I see the video transmitting, I just don't know about the audio. So that's the only question. And again, that's why I started a little bit earlier. I do see that the audio bit rate is high going to LinkedIn, but when I move the little volume slider on LinkedIn, I don't hear myself. And normally I would hear my own audio coming through. So I don't hear that. So if you happen to be watching on LinkedIn, let me know, throw a comment on LinkedIn. Let me know if you can hear the audio or not. And if you're on Facebook, you're welcome to drop me some questions over there too. I am going to, let's see, I'm going to separate that browser window by itself. There we go. Minimize some of these other windows over here. Like that. Cool. Just that way I've got my list of questions kind of in front of me that I'm going to go through. Like I said, I do take questions on Quora.com. People send me direct messages on LinkedIn and Twitter. And so I've got kind of a combination of all of these questions that I want to address. And so you are welcome to connect with me whenever you like on LinkedIn, and I'll throw that link in the chat here. So you can connect with me, linkedin.com/in/IanDouglas736. Same username as Twitter, same username as Twitch. You can contact me that way. So connect with me. Don't just follow me on LinkedIn. You need to actually connect with me, and then you can send me direct messages. And if you've got questions that you want me to answer anonymously on the stream, I will do that. But otherwise, if you actually connect on LinkedIn or on Facebook and you leave questions there, then I can say like, hey, so-and-so asked a question on Facebook. And so I will mention your name if you come on Facebook. Now, if you're on Facebook, because this is broadcasting through facebook.com/techinterview.guide, you will need to follow that page in order to leave a comment on the Facebook event. And so it's up to you if you want to follow and leave a comment there, or if you want to come over to Twitch. You can come to twitch.tv/IanDouglas736 and you can drop some comments in there if you want to ask questions live kind of as we go. And I'm happy to answer those throughout the evening. So I typically stream for 60 to 90 minutes. Again, it's all interview prep and career prep about getting your job in the tech industry. I'm actually just wrapping up a job hunt myself. I got some offers already, and pretty excited about that. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about kind of what that process is, and just ways that I can help other people get into tech. So I've been in the tech industry, just as a recap for those that haven't followed me in the past. I've been in the tech industry for a little over 25 years. It'll actually be 26 years in April that I graduated college. I studied computer engineering, so a lot of low-level programming. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Yeah, I got a couple of offers, one written, one verbal, and then one expected. So we'll see how those play out by Wednesday or so. But yeah, pretty jazzed about that. So yeah, I've been in the tech industry about 26 years. I do want to get Chris Perillo on my stream one of these days, and go over Chris's resume, because he's got a really eclectic kind of background, and it'd be really cool to get you on here. Yeah, Chris doesn't know either what he wants to be when he grows up. And that was a lot of my problem too when I was kind of restarting this job hunt back in November and December, is trying to decide, do I want to do management? Do I want to do developer relations? Do I want to do just individual contributor programming? And so yeah, that was a big challenge for me, but we got through it. So and like I said, I've got some offers going, and I'm pretty excited about that. So we'll see how those play out over the next couple of days. That's why I can't hear myself. I have LinkedIn muted. Okay, so my audio is coming through on LinkedIn, so that's great. So yeah, so again, if you are watching on LinkedIn, you can leave a comment there. If you want your comment to show up in this little panel over here on the right side, like Chris Perillo is right now, you will need to come over to Twitch. So twitch.tv/IanDouglas736. You can make a free account over there. If you've got an Amazon Prime account, you can do like a Prime subscription, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's part of your Prime account with Amazon, because Amazon owns Twitch, as I recall. And you can leave comments, and they'll show up in this panel over here on the right side as part of the stream. And I like having that on there just for the engagement effect. And I encourage people, like, hey, come in here, encourage one another, drop questions, help each other out with your own answers. I don't want to just be like a person on the internet, with opinions. Chris Perillo just subscribed. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Subscribe with Prime. Appreciate that very much. RC Maniac says hi to Chris Perillo. Yeah, RC Maniac, good to see you in chat as well. Chris, appreciate the subscription. Thank you for that. So yeah, so I'm just here to help people out. I've been, like I said, I've been in the industry a long time. I've been an individual contributor. I've also gone down the management track, and I've been a hiring manager. So I have a lot of insight from the other side of the desk of what it's like to be in an interview scenario, and the kinds of questions that I would ask during an interview and the kinds of answers I would expect. And so some of tonight's live Q&A that I try to do kind of on a regular basis, and then I slice these up into smaller videos for YouTube and podcast. These questions are typically like my perspective as a hiring manager, or my perspective having gone through the interview myself, of how I might answer a question or what I would expect to hear in a question. And some of the questions are kind of scenario based, like, hey, I went to an interview and I didn't hear back from the manager. What should I do? Like, I like to give just kind of general advice as well. So again, if you're on Facebook, you will need to follow facebook.com/techinterview.guide. You will need to follow that as a page if you want to leave a comment. But you're welcome to do that. If you're on LinkedIn, you can leave comments on LinkedIn as well, and I will see those. But Facebook and LinkedIn comments will not show up in this panel over here on the right side. The only way that you'll get your question to actually show up as part of the stream is to come over to Twitch. But it's up to you. You don't have to be on Twitch if you don't want to. And again, you can always DM me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Same username as Twitch, IanDouglas736 on Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. You can DM me questions anytime, and I'm happy to address those anonymously on the stream as well. So if you don't want your name attached, I will ask those or answer those anonymously for you. And like I said, these Q&A sessions, I do kind of slice up into smaller videos for YouTube, and I typically add those to playlists. I've got playlists over there. I'll throw my YouTube link in here. It's just youtube.com/IanDouglas. And what I'm doing with those videos is I add them to playlists around the interview prep for the general process, or the like how to prepare for the interview, or behavior questions or technical questions and whatnot. Cool, I'm gonna pause for just 1 sec. Cool, and I'm back. All right, cool. So again, if you're on LinkedIn, you can leave comments over there. If you're on Facebook, you can leave comments if you follow the page. The Extreme 2, good to see you in chat. Great content on YouTube, here on Twitch. Appreciate that. Thanks. Appreciate you dropping by chat. Yeah, happy to help people out. I love just helping people with my perspective. Again, it's just my own perspectives. I always tell people, like, make sure you're listening to lots of ideas, lots of perspectives. Don't just follow my advice. I have been in the industry a while though, and I've seen some things, but I shouldn't be the only voice that you listen to. And so I'm more than happy to share my perspective. And I also have guests on my stream from time to time. Last week I had Jamora McCullers on the stream, and they provided a really cool kind of background of how they went from being a line chef at Waffle House to being in tech, and kind of what that whole process was, and how they had to go through. They got a job doing an internship, and as that internship wrapped up, they were able to get a full-time job and went from making $15 an hour to $80,000 a year, which is a huge difference for sure. You can go check that out on YouTube. That video should be up on YouTube. And I also have regular panels on here as well. I love having people from like HR backgrounds, other engineering managers, again, just to share their ideas and perspectives. A couple of weeks back, I had an HR friend named Josh on the stream, and he and I were just rapid firing, just screening resumes. Like, would you call this person? You know, because when you apply for a job in tech, the applicant tracking system is going to give your resume to HR. They're going to kind of once over that resume, and then they're going to hand it off to me as the hiring manager if they think that you're someone that they should call. And so Josh and I kind of went back and forth, and we reviewed something like 8 resumes, I think. Just really quick. Would I call this person? Would you call this person? Would I call this person? Would you call this person? And just kind of back and forth about what stood out about the resume, and what could be improved about the resume, just to get different perspectives. I've also had Lee Gonzalez, who's an engineering manager at Guild Education here in the Denver region. Lee and I were talking a lot about like just preparation for the interviews. How do you prepare? How do you do your company research? How do you, how do you get ready? How do you get questions ready to ask them? I've actually been going through a lot of interviews myself over the past couple of weeks, and I've actually been audio recording some of them, at least when I get to the portion of the audio where or the interview where I ask them questions. And what I want to do is I'm going to go through, and I'm going to I'm not going to like play the audio back for anybody, but just for my own purposes, I do it to review my own interviews. But what I want to do is I want to go through and say, like, these are the questions that I asked that really kind of wowed them. Because it's always fun to say, do you have any questions for me? And you ask them a question, they're like, wow, that's a great question. I did a whole panel on that. I had a number of people on the stream where we just talked about how do you ask a question in an interview? What kinds of questions make good, meaningful, memorable kinds of questions? And so I've had several of those over the past couple of weeks, and I actually want to go through and like document, like, these were the scenarios, these were the kinds of interviews I was in, this was the question that I asked that specific interviewer and why I asked it, for them to go like, wow, that's a good question. I won't necessarily go into like what they answered, but just, these were the kinds of questions that sort of wowed them. What else do I have going on this week? I've got so I'm wrapping up some interviews myself, and I'm also going to be working on another blog piece for builtin.com. If any of you are familiar, I did a piece a number of months ago where it was kind of like, as an engineering manager, like, what's the interview process like? And I kind of like started off that whole piece, and actually ended up being a lot of my answers ended up being about half of that piece of writing. They reached out again, and they're like, hey, we want to get your take on a number of questions, like, tell me about yourself. I'm like, oh, I can answer that question. Again, because it's very fresh in my mind. I've gone through this interview process myself, and how I answer that question, again, based on the role, based on the company, based on the kinds of things that I think are important for them to hear. And so those are a couple of plans that I kind of want to work together as videos or as blog posts, and I'll get those up online sometime soon. So just catching up on chat a little bit. The Extreme 2 asked a question. I have a question for you. What are some questions you asked the recruiter on the initial phone interview? Great question to start off. RC Maniac says, I'm back with sustenance. I have not yet selected a job to accept, no, but I will by Wednesday. All right, so going to the extreme. So let's start off the Q&A with this one. So the extreme is asking, what are some questions that you ask the recruiter on the initial phone interview? I would generally stay away from like, tell me about the benefits and things like that, because that sounds like you're more interested in what you're getting from the company. On that first call where the recruiter is reaching out to you for the very first time and they want to find out a little bit about your background, the kinds of questions that I would ask them, the number 2 questions I would always ask them right up front: what's the interview process like, and what's the salary band for this role? Those are the first 2 questions out of my mouth when I meet with a recruiter. What's the interview process going to be like? They should have an idea of how many stages there are in the interview, how long. So, get them to break it down into detail, like how many different sort of steps are there in the interview? How long are they? Who are they with? Maybe not the person, but like, is it an engineering manager? Is it an engineer? Is it like someone on the team? Is it like just, what's that process going to be like? And then I always follow that up with, what's the salary band for the role? If they don't start by asking me, how much do I want? I always ask them, what is the salary band for the role? In all of the interviewing I've been doing since November, only one company has refused to answer that question. Every other company has been completely transparent up front, saying this is what we're offering for the role. Is that okay? And I usually answer, like, if it's a little bit lower than what I was expecting to make, then I would tell them right away, like, it's a little bit low, but let's get through the process and let's see what's going on. It kind of prompts them a little bit that, hey, I'm probably going to negotiate if we start making moves on this role. I'm going to be negotiating at the end. If it sounds okay, if that range sounds good to me, then I usually just say something like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's keep talking through the process. Let's keep working through the process. Or if it's like way above what I was expecting, I just shut my mouth. I'm not ever going to say like, wow, you're going to offer that much? Cool. I wasn't expecting anywhere near that much money. You don't say things like that during an interview, but typically, so going back to what the extreme was saying in chat, like asking about 401k and things like that, that's not the time. That would be something that you would ask like later on in the process, or ask as part of like towards the end of the process. Now, if that's something that's important to you, if it's important to you that you are sort of saving for retirement and sort of like future planning and things like that, if that kind of stuff is super important to you for where your priorities lie, you can ask that kind of, I would say, like maybe midway through the process. But you don't want to ask that kind of thing too early in the process, because again, it makes it sound like you want more from the company than what you're willing to bring. So I would be careful about too much of those kinds of questions, and just try to play it a little bit safe in that regard, and just ask them, what's the process like? How long does it typically take to work through all of the interviews? So ask a lot of details, like what's the interview process? How long is each interview session? How far apart are they? Things like that. And they'll typically ask as well, like, do you have any other interviews? Do you have any offers? Like, do we need to speed things up if you're kind of all the way through the interview process with other people? Like, should we speed this up? A lot of recruiters are pretty on the ball about that, especially nowadays. If you're a senior developer, you're going to get a lot more attention from recruiters. And so you want to make sure that you let them know if you're interviewing somewhere else, especially if you have other interviews from other companies, whatever. You absolutely, need to keep those recruiters up to date on those things. I actually did that late last week with a couple of places that I was interviewing with. I'm like, hey, by the way, I have a written offer, I have a verbal offer, I'm expecting a third offer next week. What can we do to kind of hurry this up? Because I really want to work for your company. That's what you tell them anyway. And it's amazing how quickly they start making things happen when you tell them you have an offer in hand. So a couple of ideas there. Hopefully that'll help out. Follow up from the extreme says, usually if they're a direct hire, some brief intro about the company, number of engineering team. Yeah. RC Maniac says sometimes they don't like to tell the process. True. I have yet to have, like, any company, again, since I've been interviewing since November, none of the companies have chosen not to disclose what their interview process is like. They'll usually say like, oh, we'll have you meet with so-and-so, we're going to have to meet you. Like it would typically go from the recruiter to like a hiring manager as a phone screen, some sort of technical screen, and then like some other sort of like prove you can do the job, and then like maybe some culture calls, things like that. That's typically the interview process that you're going to follow. Again, depending on the type of role, depending on the type of company. And then those may be like several stages in themselves. Like the technical screen may be pretty involved, or the culture screen may be pretty involved, depending on what's important to the company. But again, they should at least describe the overall process. And you can always ask them, what can I expect as far as like the number of hours of actual interviews? And then how far apart are they? Like, is this something that you're going to spread out over 2-3 weeks? Or could this happen within a couple of days? And generally, they're pretty accommodating if you need to speed things up. I did have one company, for example, say like, hey, this is the process that we want to follow. And they asked me to set the pace. And they're like, you tell us how quickly you want to get through all of these interviews. And I was actually pretty surprised by that. But they're such a big company, they had a lot of interviewers that they could literally just drop in anybody at any time to jump on those interviews. So every company is a little bit different. The smaller the company, the fewer people they're going to have for that sort of thing. And so you can certainly ask those questions of the interviewers. Cool. So Extreme, thanks for the question. It was a great question to kind of kick things off here. RC Maniac says, during phone interviews, I often got asked, why do you want to work here? I've been asked that too. And again, that question sort of plays in with, tell me about yourself, and sort of the things that they want to hear there. And the typical answer that I would give on that has to do with what sort of parts of my background do I want to talk about to the company that's relevant for that role. So anytime they ask me, like, tell me about yourself, in my mind, I'm always trying to think ahead of what kinds of things do they want to hear from me? Like what is really going to win them over as far as like the content that I need to share with them about my background and what I want to do and where I want to take my career. I would always focus that answer around them and that role. And so in my, I actually maintain a little Trello board now where I put in the job description or a link to the job description, and then a whole bunch of talking points about like these are the like 4 or 5 main points that I need to get across when they ask, tell me about yourself, or why do you want this job? To me, that's the same question. And so I always write down a couple of bullet points. And so I typically move that on my screen, like right underneath my camera in case it's a video call. And I want to make sure that it seems like I'm making eye contact with them. And so I'm going to be looking right into that camera, but really my notes are right underneath that. And so I'm kind of glancing at those notes while I'm kind of glancing up at the camera. So it looks like I'm engaging them and making eye contact with them. That actually makes a really big impact on a lot of phone calls. It's just making it look like you're connecting with them. That's a really, really big thing. And so just underneath that is where I would have those notes. And so when they say, like, why do you want this job? I would talk about, well, this is my background and this is what I'm currently learning. This is why you're going to be a great stop on my sort of journey in my career in tech. And I've always gotten past that interview. And so just being really well prepared about what you want to tell for that story and how you explain that story about what background do you have that you're bringing to this role that's going to really entice us to want to move forward with you to other calls. And so just being really practiced about that, like what is it about your background that you're really passionate about that you really want to be doing? Those would be really important things to kind of talk about there. Indifferent Ghost, good to see you in chat. Hello. Again, if you're watching on LinkedIn, you can leave comments on LinkedIn. I will see those kind of as you go. If you're watching on Facebook, hello on Facebook, you will need to follow the page at facebook.com/techinterview.guide. You will need to follow the page in order to leave a comment on the live video. But you are welcome to leave comments there. And I will see comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, but they won't show up in this little panel over here to the right. If you want your question to show up in the panel over here as part of the stream itself, then you will need to come over to Twitch, and that link is down here at the bottom. It's just twitch.tv/IanDouglas736. And yeah, you can stream on LinkedIn. You have to apply to stream on LinkedIn Live, but it is totally possible to do. And I'm also streaming on Facebook at the same time. I thought about streaming to YouTube at the same time. I'm like, I don't want to get too overkill. But yeah, I thought I'd try a couple of broadcasts on multiple platforms, and then we'll see how that goes. And then on Thursday, I've got Erick Garcia coming to the stream, and I'll pull up some background on Erick here while I continue to talk. And So the next 2 Thursdays, I've got different people coming on the stream. This Thursday, I've got Erick Garcia. He is a lead Android developer for a company, and I forget where we met, but he's doing Android development for Kaiser Permanente, and I forget how we connected, but we've only been connected fairly recently. I want to say I saw Eric giving some career advice and reaching out to people on Twitter, and so we connected on Twitter, and then we connected on LinkedIn, and I'm like, Eric, you got to be on my stream. And Eric agreed. So Eric's going to be on my stream this week. Next week, I've got Mike Chen. Mike Chen also streams here on Twitch as generic Mike Chen. And Mike does live interview questions with a friend of his on his stream, where he'll be given like a technical challenge, and he'll actually talk you through what he would go through as a senior developer working his way through a technical challenge. So I got Mike on the stream next week on the 20th. So this week on the 13th, I got Erick Garcia coming in, and I'm looking forward to getting to know both of those folks as well. If you've got a background in HR and engineering management, or if you've been through a bunch of interviews lately and you want to be on the stream and kind of talk about sort of your experience, hit me up on Twitch, hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the platforms. I'm happy to have people on the stream. And so I definitely want to get different people in the mix, and happy to just hear different perspectives. Like we had Jamira on the stream last week, just to hear kind of their sort of progress and how they were studying Free Code Camp and then went to Flatiron at the same time while they were working, trying to juggle all these different things, and how that ended up as an internship and turned into a full-time job from there. It was a really cool chat and really cool journey, so you can go check that out on YouTube. So cool. All right, well, let's get back to chat here. Let's see what's going on. It's me, CSV. Good to see you in chat as well. I have my first technical interview next week in JavaScript, but I only have experience in Ruby. Is it expected that I will be needing to look up documentation the entire time? What's the best way to handle that? That's a great question. I would say my first concern would be, why is the company forcing you to do your interview in JavaScript? Companies should be letting you use whatever tool you are most comfortable in. Now, if you are applying for a front-end position, then of course that's going to be in JavaScript. But if they look at your background and they see that you're a Ruby developer and they're still willing to hire you, or at least interview you, then that shows that they believe you've got at least enough experience that you're probably going to get along okay in JavaScript. What I would do is I would probably call them back and say, hey, is it possible to do the interview in Ruby because that's my strength? Or I can show you what I do in JavaScript, but I may need to look up documentation. Is that kind of thing okay? I would talk to the recruiter about that before you get to that interview, if possible. If they say like, yeah, you can, we do want you to work in JavaScript, we do want to see what kind of progress you can make, that's okay. It could just be like your problem-solving process of a technical challenge is going to be the same no matter what your language is. And so just to kind of walk through the 4-point step that I would typically coach someone to do during a technical challenge, you want to restate the problem back to them. And then you want to ask a lot of clarifying questions about what it is they want you to build. And then you're going to plan what you want to build. And that could be writing out some notes or writing out some pseudocode. And then after that, you want to actually get down to write some code. But you need those first 3 steps. If you don't kind of figure out what exactly they want you to do, and you don't ask questions about edge cases, and you don't plan, if you just jump immediately into the code, then you're kind of designing as you go, and it's going to be a lot harder to solve that challenge because you're writing the code in the present, but you're also thinking ahead of what to do. And so if you take the time to kind of design things out, like find out what exactly it is they want you to build, and then you kind of plan that out before you start writing on the real code, you're going to have a much easier chance of succeeding. But you got to do that design up front. And so, if you've worked at all in JavaScript, I think you'll do okay. They're probably not going to give you anything like super, super complex, but it also depends on the role, and it depends on your background and experience and so on. But if this is your very first technical interview, then you're probably an entry-level dev, and they're going to recognize that. And so they're not going to be giving you something incredibly hard. They're going to give you something that's just going to test your process and probably test your problem-solving skills. But the interview, like when I think about technical challenges in an interview, they really serve 2 purposes. The first purpose is to kind of hear your process and to hear how you break a problem into smaller pieces, and then how do you sort of solve each of those steps. And the second part of the technical challenge is to really see what you're going to work like as an employee. And a lot of people don't really catch on to this. And so by kind of walking through that process of, if I give you a problem on the job, I want to make sure that you kind of can relay back to me what it is you're going to do, and you're going to ask questions about it, and that you're also going to design what you're going to kind of do as a solution before you start on real code. And so your process in that technical challenge is really showing them, hey, this is what I'm going to be like as an employee. And so taking the time to kind of go through those steps is really valuable for them to see how you solve problems and how you make your decisions and how you get ready to actually do some work. And so as an entry-level dev, for me as a hiring manager, it's a little bit less about, can you solve the problem? Can you actually write the code? And a lot more about, what's your process? How do you communicate? How are you telling me what's going on, why you're making the decisions you are, and how you're designing it in the first place? So for me, an entry-level dev, it's going to be more about your process and about your communication than it is about the quality of your code. Because you're an entry-level dev, there's going to be a lot of things you don't know, especially if they're asking you to write code in JavaScript when you're a Ruby developer in this case. Then they're going to understand, like, if you've only got a tiny bit of experience in JavaScript, they're probably not going to be having you work in something like React or Angular or something like that. It's probably just, hey, just write plain JavaScript code to solve a problem. And so if you don't have like the full breadth of knowledge in JavaScript to do that, that's okay. You don't have to. But I would say, like, try to ask them ahead of time whether you can do the code in Ruby. If they really want you to do it in JavaScript, that's fine. Just let them know like how much JavaScript experience you have, and that they're okay with you like looking up documentation and stuff. Sometimes how you go about solving a problem for something you don't know is also really telling about you as an engineer. That can be a big thing too. I've actually been asked that exact question during some of my interviews lately. What do you do when you don't know the answer to something? In the interviews I've been doing about developer relations, it's typically you're up in front of people and you're talking, you're giving some sort of technical talk, or you're presenting some data, and there's going to be some kind of Q&A portion on that, and you're going to be taking questions from the audience, and they may stump you on something. So how do you tackle that? It's like, well, you tell them you don't know, and you're going to go find out. And it's okay to say that in an interview too. DevCreshed, I'm not sure how to pronounce your username, but I appreciate the follow. Thanks for that. Again, if you're watching on LinkedIn, you can leave comments over on LinkedIn. And if you're on Facebook, you can leave comments on the Facebook video as well if you follow the page at facebook.com/techinterview.guide. Cool. Let me get caught up on some of the chat here a little bit. The Extreme asked another question. I'm trying to move from software engineer to senior software engineer or lead. Any tips and tricks? I have 7 years experience. That's a good question too. How do you sort of level up in that case? As a hiring manager and as a former lead myself, I would say anybody that wants to kind of promote up into those ranks, you have to be pretty good at mentorship, and you have to be pretty good at system design and kind of like the architecture of what you're building. But then there's also a component of like rallying everybody together to go solve a problem as a team. And so if you want to get into that lead kind of role and kind of go down the individual contributor where you're getting into like a lead, principal, staff level kind of role, you're going to get farther and farther away from actual hands-on coding. But it's going to be more about how do you win people over to your ideas, and how do you get them to work on a project with you. So how do you design a project? How do you break that into components, and then how do you lead a team for each of those components and kind of keep track of what they're doing? And so to progress in that, you'll want to ask for more responsibility on the job, and probably look for ways where you can shadow somebody already in that role and kind of learn from their experience about how do you do things at a slightly higher level than what you would do as a contributor. And then from there, try to figure out, okay, well, now how do I build up the rapport with the team about sort of winning them over and leading them and being able to, like I say, kind of rally them around you to say, hey, we got this problem that we need to go solve. You know, I'm going to get RC Maniac, and you're going to lead this part of the team, and Extreme 2, you're going to like lead this part of the team. And, you know, the two of you are going to connect with me on a regular basis, and we're going to talk about progress on your team. And if you want help on like what you need to build, then we'll talk about that. But you're kind of delegating more responsibility than you are doing hands-on coding at that point. So as far as that progression, that's how I would start. Is I would, if you're already a senior level dev, you should be really good at mentoring people and building up kind of that communication and what we call rapport on the team of being kind of a go-to person, that you're open and you're willing to kind of take input and feedback and admit when you're wrong on things, but you're also going to take ownership of a component of something and lead other people to finish that component. And then from there, you'll kind of progress through the ranks of, from there, now you're going to lead other leaders. And then from there, you're going to get more into the architecture level. But as I say, the farther sort of up the chain you go, as far as like lead to like principal to staff kind of level, you're going to get farther and farther away from code. And instead, you're going to be leading more teams and talking about like the architecture and the design. So getting really, really good at system design and architecture and maybe database design as well. Those are going to be really, really big strengths for you. All right, let's also get some other stuff going from chat here. RC Maniac gave some advice to Extreme 2. It says, in that case, apply to senior level positions or ask the recruiter. The decision of if you'll be hired as a senior will be made after you finish the interview. But if they don't know you're applying for a senior role, they may not ask you questions that expect from someone at a senior level. Yeah, I agree. If you get an offer and it's not a senior level role, then talk to the recruiter, indicate that you have a better interest in a senior role. Yeah. The earlier you can do that, the better. You don't want to get all the way to the end of the interview and have them make an offer and then you say, well, that wasn't the level I was expecting. Unless they've kind of communicated throughout the process, like, hey, you applied for a principal level role, but you don't have the experience, so we're going to bring you in as a senior. That's different. But if you apply for a senior level role and they make an offer and you're like, but I wanted a principal role, then you should have known that ahead of time and told them that much earlier on. RC Maniac says seniors start to have more of a management role, but not as a manager. Yeah, I agree. You may still do some one-on-ones with your team just to kind of get a sense of like how they're doing with their work and where they need help with coaching. And then you can certainly pass those notes on to your manager because they will want to keep track of like career progressions and what people on your team are interested in and things like that. And during the interview, RC Maniac says you will be asked what projects you lead or have led, how many people you worked with. Yep. And I've certainly been asked that too. Like, how many people did you lead? How many people have you managed? How many managers have you managed? So depending on the type of role, they're going to be asking for quantified information. I got asked a week ago, what was the largest team I ever managed? And I said, well, I was a contributor. I had 2 or 3 other contributors under me. I also had 2 other managers under me that managed 20 to 30 part-time data entry people. And so you sum all that up, and I had probably 30 to 40 people under me at any one time. That's a lot to juggle. That doesn't mean that I was directly interacting with those data entry folks, but I did have to interact with those other 2 managers that were managing that team and make sure that, they had enough people on that team, that they were, sort of taking care of their people okay, that they were being paid fairly and all that kind of stuff. So again, you're kind of, it's more delegation when you get into that level of the management side of things. Cool. These are great questions so far. Haven't even gotten any of the questions I have queued up, but this has been a really great start to the stream so far. So definitely keep dropping those questions in there. And again, if you're on LinkedIn, you can drop comments on the video and I'll try to see those. If I haven't seen them yet, there has been a problem in LinkedIn where when I went live the other day with a test video, the comments didn't show up until I refreshed the page a couple of times. I've been refreshing a couple of times here and there, trying to see if there's any comments on there. Could someone do me a favor? If you're also on LinkedIn, could you go find me on LinkedIn and just drop a comment on LinkedIn for me? I'm just curious if those are showing up or not. That would be a big help. Nasty Nate, thanks for the follow. Appreciate that. First time chat. I saw you at the Android meetup. Didn't know I was streaming. Cool. Well, good to see you. Yeah, I do live streaming around career prep and interview prep. I've been in the industry a long time, and I've also been in a hiring manager kind of position. And so I like to provide my perspectives and ideas about what the tech interview process is going to be like, especially for people that are trying to get into tech for their first job, and how can I help with that. And I also like to have people on the stream as well to help sort of share their perspectives. And so if you are interested in being on the stream as a guest sometime, like last week we had Jamira on, this week we got Eric, next week we got Mike. The week after that's open. So if you want to be on the stream January 27th, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or Twitch or email. I'm ian.douglas@techinterview.guide. You can reach out to me and we can have a chat and talk about like what sorts of topics we want to sort of chat about. But yeah, I love having people on the stream just to share their perspectives and their viewpoints and things like that about what it's like to be in tech and what their experience has been, especially if it's been like recent interview experience. That can be really, really helpful. If you're on Twitch, you can also redeem your chat points on there to do things like remind me to hydrate. If you want me to tell a dad joke, I got all kinds of those kinds of things queued up too. But yeah, it's good to have everybody on the stream for sure. So I'm just going to take a quick break here and hydrate a little bit and just make sure my voice can hold up for a little while yet. All right. Cool. Well, I definitely appreciate the follows. I don't do this to make money. So I don't monetize any of this stuff whatsoever. I don't monetize my YouTube. I don't monetize the podcast. I don't monetize anything here on Twitch. I have had a handful of people subscribe on Twitch, which I really, really appreciate. I'm trying to find ways of giving that money back to the community in some way. I also started getting some merchandise. So I have these little mugs and so on that you can buy, and mouse pads and desk pads and t-shirts and things like that. And kind of decided all the money that I get from that I'm going to be allocating to different tech groups, especially for underserved communities and groups of people that have been historically marginalized in tech. So I'm going to be allocating like any sort of profit off of any of that stuff to those folks. So, cool. Let's get back to chat. RC Maniac says, I'm not a senior dev, but I would be given a task to do and then do that task. But my seniors in the role would be delegating tasks, interacting with other teams. Yep. And then take point. Was there an issue? I'm going to look into that. I'm going to follow up. I see it touched another team's code. Let's make sure they're aware and so on. Yep. And so that's kind of the role of the lead, where those leads should be in constant communication. Like, hey, my team made this kind of change that could impact these other teams. That's one reason that I often say on the stream, I have a lot of respect for people in QA, because people that are in QA roles, they already kind of know how things are going to interact and how, a change on this, service over here is going to impact a service over here, and how those communication things happen. And so I do have a ton of respect for people in QA roles and testing roles where, they have a really deep understanding of the communication side of things. And so I have said on the stream a couple of times, like if your first job in tech is a QA role, don't ever feel that you're pigeonholed in QA. What I always tell people is go for a software job on that next role and tell them you did QA on purpose. Even if getting that QA job was the only way you could get into tech, it's totally fine. Your next job, go for a developer role and tell them you got into QA on purpose because you knew it was going to make you a better developer. Because now you've got this wider understanding of how systems communicate and how all these different things sort of interoperate and sort of touch and whatever across all the systems. You have a much deeper understanding of that and a much deeper appreciation. So it was totally on purpose that you went down that road. So it's okay to tell them that during an interview, that you took that QA role on purpose. Same thing with customer service. If your only way into the tech industry is to go get a customer service job, do that. My first job out of college was customer service. And it made me a better developer because now I have a deeper appreciation of the user experience. And I have a better appreciation of what the user goes through. And so sell them on that. You are a better developer because you chose to do that as your job. So don't ever feel that you're pigeonholed in those kinds of roles or that it's sort of like beneath you. It can actually be a very strong stepping stone into a developer role by how you present that as your story when you go interview for that next job. Sly TV, appreciate the comment in chat. Says I'm providing a great resource. Happy to do it. I'm happy to provide that input and perspective from being in tech a long time, and I love to have people on the stream that can kind of share their perspectives too. Appreciate folks like RC Maniac and so on that are just dropping their own little knowledge nuggets in the chat as well, helping people out. We're here to help. Like, we're really here to help each other out. There are a lot of other channels that I follow, like the Jonan Show, that also do a really great job just giving advice to people. We're not looking for subscribers. We're not looking to make a ton of money off of this stuff. We're just looking to help people out as best we can. Cool. Let's go back to chat. Let's see what we got going on. Nasty Nate and RC Maniac look like they're chatting tech stacks and things like that. RC Maniac says, I got some of the strangest looks with what you're describing now, but not for a job. I want to take this train via these transfers. Okay, but there's another train that is direct, I know, but I want to get experience with this route. Yeah, exactly. And it can be the same thing in tech. And so if you're looking for your first job in tech, I also typically tell people, like, your first job, 2 jobs, maybe your first 3 jobs in tech aren't necessarily going to be your dream job, or they don't have to be your dream job. They can just be stepping stones for where you want to get to. And I think that those first couple of jobs can be really important and really vital to also find out what it is you want to do. One of the big questions that I get from mentees and when I was a teacher, like, the number one question is, like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, what should I go do? Should I become a developer? Should I go into QA? It's like, you can do whatever you want. Working in tech is a giant choose your own adventure book, and you get to choose what you do at the end of every chapter. And when you finish that chapter, you can keep going in the same direction. You get to change direction if you want to. It's totally up to you. You are in charge of your career. It's all how you tell that story if you're going to change direction. That's all it is. And so if that first job isn't exactly what you want to do, that's okay. That next job, though, you want to tell them what you learned from it and why you decided to pivot and why their company is going in a better direction for you. That's really all it comes down to. So that whole, like, tell me your story, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to work here? That whole story that you tell them is all about, this is why I'm headed in that direction, the same as you, and this is why I'm going to be a great employee at this job. That's really all you have to sort of sell them on in that scenario. Cool. If you are on Twitch right now, if you happen to also have a LinkedIn account, if you can log into LinkedIn, and let me grab the link for that. If someone can head over to LinkedIn, can't show history, let's try this. If someone can head over to LinkedIn and just drop a comment for me on LinkedIn. I'm just curious whether comments are actually working over there, because I haven't seen any comments come in. I do see that I have viewers over on LinkedIn. None of them are leaving comments right now. And so I don't know if it's a problem with the UI again, where I have to keep refreshing in order to see new comments. But if someone could head over to LinkedIn and just drop a comment on the video and let me know that, let me know in Twitch then that you left a comment, because I'm curious whether it's blocking the comments for me again. It's something that I'll have to talk to LinkedIn support. Because when I did this test on Saturday morning, I think, I was able to stream to LinkedIn, but it took several refreshes for those comments to actually start showing up for me to see. So if someone could help me out with that, that'd be a big, big help. Thank you. All right, next question up from the extreme. Hey, Ian, how do you usually search for jobs? Do you apply to job openings on LinkedIn, or recruiters who reach out with job opportunities and LinkedIn emails? A combination of all the above. I'm part of a couple of communities as well that share job boards with each other. And so that's a third resource that I use. A lot of it, though, is me doing networking and researching the kinds of companies where I want to work. And so when you've been in tech a little while and you've built up the experience, you have the luxury of taking your time to find that next job. Now, if you've been laid off or you quit, or you're trying to get that first job, then time is of the essence. And so you have a little less time to do that research. And so you may want to use job boards and recruiters, especially recruiters, to get that first job. Make sure, though, that when you're reaching out to recruiters, you're reaching out to a recruiter that works at the company where you're interested in applying. I typically tell people, like, don't go to third-party agency recruiters first. I would use them like as a later sort of effort. The reason being, if you're new in tech, those agency recruiters are a lot less likely to help you out. Doesn't mean they won't help you out, but they will be less likely to help you out. And the reason being that they make a percentage of your salary. And as an entry-level dev, your salary is lower, and so their kickback is much lower. And so they're less inclined from a financial point of view to help you out. But if you can reach out to recruiters at the company, then they don't really have that incentive, or at least the same kind of incentive to help you get that job. And so they're more likely to just help you out. So I would start by networking with friends, and say like, hey, I'm looking for a job. This is the kind of job I'm looking for. Do you know anybody hiring? There was some research done a couple of years ago that you were way more likely to get a job from a second degree connection on LinkedIn than your first degree connections on LinkedIn. And so that basically means like the people that you were directly connected to on LinkedIn, they know somebody that's more likely to hire you than anyone in your first degree connections. And so it's all about networking. It's all about finding those job opportunities through people that you already know. Like reach out to your first degree connections and say, hey, do you know anybody that's hiring? They probably know people that are hiring. Or they'll ask their friends like, hey, I know this person, they're looking for a job. This is kind of their background. Can you reach out to them and network with them? Or they can make an introduction, then you can get connected on LinkedIn that way. That's way more likely to get you, especially your first job. For me, when I was kind of starting this new job hunt, I started out by very specifically targeting a couple of companies. One of them was New Relic because I knew a bunch of people there on the DevRel team that I have a lot of respect for, that I was getting to know, and I really, really wanted that job. And unfortunately, they put a pause on their hiring, so I didn't get the job. And then I had worked at SendGrid in the past, and they're now owned by Twilio. And so I went to Twilio and said, hey, I've worked there in the past. I've got a DevRel kind of developer relations, developer advocate kind of background. I want to interview with that team. And so I got into that interview because I had already worked there, but because I also knew people on the team that internally in the company were willing to go to HR and the recruiters and say, hey, we know Ian. Ian's going to be great on the team. Fortunately, that job didn't pan out because I screwed up their interview process, but that's totally on me. It's not on them whatsoever. And so those were the first couple of jobs. And when those didn't work out, then I'm like, okay, well now I need to like start applying for other jobs. And that's where the networking really kicked in. I started posting a lot more on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. I'm looking for this kind of job, and wanted to get more involved that way. And so I had a lot more folks leaving feedback and questions and things like that for applying for jobs. Had a ton of my old students, a ton of my old coworkers reach out and say, hey, check out my company, check out this company, check out that company. And like I said, I'm a part of a number of other communities where they share job boards. And so I was able to kind of go through and through those connections, realize like, hey, this is actually going to be a good connection or a good sort of company that I want to work for. This is going to stretch me in some way. Any job I ever apply for, I try to target like 60 to 75% of my skill set directly applies, and the other like 30% of the job scares the crap out of me because I don't know how to do that job. I'm a big believer in if you don't apply for a job that scares you just a little bit, you're applying for the wrong job. You should always apply for a job where you know you're going to grow. That's like a big thing for me. I always want growth in whatever job I take. And so I always try to find a job where my background and my skills and what I want to be doing directly fit with the job. And then there's also a portion of the job that just scares the pants off of me because I'm like, oh, can I do that part of the job? It's part of my imposter syndrome kicking in, but like, can I really do that part of the job? Am I really going to be qualified for that job? So I always apply for those. And so that was kind of the tactic that I took in kind of mid to late December to apply for the jobs that I've currently applied for. And as part of that, someone reached out to me and said like, hey, you know what, I've got this senior level job at this company. Like, let's get you to meet some people and we'll see about like creating a role. And that's the verbal offer that I got. And so I have a standing verbal offer with a company. I got to like finish up some interviews for them. But then hopefully that'll turn into a job offer this week. And then I did several other interviews. Some of them I walked away from because the process was going to be like hours and hours and hours and hours. There was one FANG level company that I had applied to where it was a DevRel job. It was in the e-commerce space, and I've done e-commerce and I've done DevRel. And so it was going to be a good mix of things, but it was also going to stretch me in a lot of ways too. But then they're like, all right, well, there's a half-hour screening call and then a 60-minute coding screen. And then if that goes well, then we actually formally get you into the mix where there's another 60-minute code screen, a 60-minute presentation, another 60-minute session for something else, and then like 4 30-minute Q&A sessions. I'm like, all right, so we're going to wrap up these interviews in like April. Like, it was ridiculous, like how long this process was going to take. So I thanked them for their time. I did the first half hour hiring manager screen, and they came back immediately like, yes, we absolutely want to interview you. I'm like, cool, I appreciate that, but I'm not going through all that. So thank you anyway. And I walked away from it. So yeah, anyway. SNSN8 asked about my streaming setup. Yeah, I got all that gear on the Twitch page if you want to check that out, as far as like the cameras and the audio and stuff that I have. Road to SWE, appreciate the follow. Thanks for that. Cool. Just kind of looking back through chat a little bit here. Dev Crush asked a question, so appreciate the chat there. Let's address this. It says, I'm a first-year college student looking into internships for this coming summer. As I'm sure you're aware, a number of these opportunities have passed already. I'm a little late to the party. I'm curious what I can do to make my knowledge, which is entirely self-taught aside from previous positions, seem more attractive and trustworthy. That's not at all too specific a question. That's exactly the kind of question that I love to answer on the stream. So just to break this down a little bit, Dev Crush is a first-year college student, and they feel like they're a little bit late for applying for internships this coming summer. Trash Dive, good to see you in chat too. So I would say, yeah, you're a little bit late to the game. A lot of internship positions tend to open up like October, November. And so they're going to get like a flood of applicants. That doesn't mean that you're completely lost as far as internships. Some companies have internships all year round. A lot of companies, though, they plan for internships in the spring because that's when kind of the spring term ends and they know you're going to be available for a number of months in the summer. But depending on your school, if your school goes all year round, then, where you kind of start and stop as far as needing an internship is going to vary a little bit. And so there are companies that hire interns all year round. And so you can certainly try to find those opportunities. I would just constantly be looking for internship types of opportunities, but also reach out to companies where you're really interested and say, I really want to work there. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a first-year college student. I'm looking for an internship. This is my background. This is my experience. What have you got? And you're going to find a lot of those through networking and just getting to know people and getting to know different companies. But you have to start with the networking. That's really going to be really important. So start reaching out to recruiters and hiring managers at those companies where you really want your internship, and then find out from them what their internship application process is. If they come back and say, sorry, our internships are all like closed for next summer, then you'll need to move on. But that's okay. I would say any kind of like first internship role, you're going to learn a ton anyway. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be at like a really big name brand kind of company. Having any kind of internship experience is going to be good professional experience. I mean, that's not to say that, getting that first job at like a FANG level company, isn't going to look amazing on your resume, but everybody's targeting that right now. And those companies are only going to have a certain number of internships, certainly not enough for everybody applying. And so I would also reach out to small companies, mid-sized companies, try to think of some industries that are really interesting to you and apply for internships at those companies as well. And again, if they don't have one posted, reach out to the recruiters, reach out to the hiring managers on LinkedIn, go find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them directly and say, I'm a first-year college student, I'm looking for an internship, these are the skills I have. You don't have to tell them that you're self-taught, you don't have to describe what you don't know. You just say, I'm a first-year student, here's my resume, these are the kinds of projects that I've been working on, and just give them a list of what you can bring to them, but don't highlight anything about what you don't have. You don't want to level yourself. You don't want to sort of position yourself as, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. Just position yourself with, this is the experience I do bring. This is the background I do have. This is, the amount of experience I do have in this language or this technology. These are the projects I have worked on. That's all you need to present to them. And once you present that to them, then it's on them to figure out whether they want to interview you. So I would start there. And if the big companies have all closed up their internships, then move down to mid-sized companies, smaller companies. It may surprise you, the kinds of companies that are willing to look at internships. One thing I would absolutely not do, though, don't take a free internship. You never want to take a free internship if you can help it. Your internship should be paid. There are legislations where in some locations they cannot make you work for free. But some companies would be like, yeah, you can come work here as an intern for free. We're not going to pay you for it because we're teaching you a ton of stuff. Those companies are already, I mean, that's kind of sketchy in my mind. If they're making you work for free because you're getting experience from them, then that tells me they don't really value you as an employee. They should be paying you for your time. So make sure that that you're getting paid for that internship. Some amount of money. Hopefully it's more than like what you'd make as working in the service industry or something like that. But you should be making money on an internship for sure. Cool. Looking back through chat. So follow from DevCresh. I have a page on my site that makes some plots about CO2 levels that updates. Would you consider that non-trivial? I mean, yeah. I mean, if you like looking into that sort of thing as far as like energy levels and carbon dioxide levels, you could certainly look at green companies, power companies, companies that care about like energy conservation. If that's something that's really intriguing to you, go find those companies. There's one in the Denver area here called Uplight. I don't know whether they have internships or not, but I do know that that's an area that they focus on. There's a lot of energy conservation and how to get, just everyday people to lower their overall energy usage. So you could definitely look at companies like that if that's the kind of thing that's really important to you. And if you find a company and you apply there and they don't have a job, go find their competitors, go find their competition, and then go apply at their competition. If that's something that's really important to you and intriguing to you as an industry, then stay within that industry and go find lots of companies in that industry and go apply to all of them. Don't just apply to one and go, oh, that one company didn't work out, so I guess I'll go try gaming or something instead. No, if that industry is really important to you, go find their competitors and go apply to all of their competitors too. Let's see. Nasty Nate says in chat, I recently completed a tech interview process with a bigger San Francisco tech company at the senior level. I was successful. I can share that they basically asked a LeetCode easy question, a system design piece, and 2 Android-specific interviews. Yeah, that's cool. Rewind back to 2016, I was a self-taught dev and worked on pet projects that I shared during the interview process. Yeah, so, I mean, it really does come down to how you present your work. Like, why were those projects important to you? What sort of problem did you have? How did you solve that in code? Because it's a realistic sort of project. Like, I had a real problem. This is how I used code to solve it. If you're just like, yeah, I needed a way to organize my stuff, so I wrote a to-do list app. It's like, yeah, there's thousands and thousands of to-do list apps. That's not like a really novel kind of thing. But for me, if I wanted to do something like, yeah, I wasn't sure that my furnace was outputting things properly, so I set up some temperature sensors throughout my house just to kind of gauge airflow and kind of collected all that, and I put it up on this dashboard, and I can plot, when the furnace kicked in, I can see all the temperature changes in different rooms in my house. Like, people are going to look at that and go, wow, that's kind of cool. That's like, they probably haven't seen something like that before. Maybe it needs like a couple of Raspberry Pis and a couple of like $2 temperature sensors. Like, if that's what it takes, go borrow some hardware from some friends that geek out on hardware and just go craft something and find a way to push that up to the cloud and some visualization tool. There's lots of tooling out there for doing that kind of stuff. A lot of that hardware is also really inexpensive. A little ESP32 board will cost you like $2 on Amazon plus a $2 sensor. Wire it up with a couple of wires, figure out how to get that on your Wi-Fi, figure out how to push that up to a cloud server somewhere. I bet you could put a couple of those things together for less than $20 and push that up on a dashboard, blog about it, put your code on GitHub, talk about like how you're pushing it up to the cloud somewhere, and then take screenshots of that data, put those screenshots in your README on GitHub, and then talk about those kinds of things as a side project. Like, solve a real problem. Like, just think of something novel around your house, around your apartment, like whatever that is. Just find a real problem, solve it in code, and then be able to talk about like why that was important to you and why you solved that problem. That's the kind of story that's really compelling in an interview. If it's just like, yeah, I had this project at school that I got assigned, that's not as compelling as something that you found a problem and you solved that problem. That makes a much more compelling story. Going back through chat, DevCresh says, what's your stance on prototypical projects like sorting or pathfinding visualizers? They're not necessarily bad. especially as a first-year project. Like as a first-year student, those are the kinds of things where you're just sort of starting out and you're just learning how to do those kinds of things. So those kinds of projects are fine. But again, it's a lot about like, can you find those novel sorts of projects that really stand out to a company or to a hiring manager or to a recruiter that's like, especially if there's a company that you really like. And here's a piece of advice that I like to give out when I talk about like company research and so on. Find out while you're doing that company research, do they have an API? Do they have a library or something that you can use in a project? Because then when you go apply for that job, you're not just, dev crush with a list of skills. You're dev crush who's a customer of theirs and you want to work there because you love their product so much. It completely changes the story. Why do you want to work here? I've actually been a user of your software for a long time. I've been using it in this project and I've been really compelled by it. I really like the interface and I want to be part of that experience. That's a completely different take than, I'm a first year student and I happen to have the technical skills that you're looking for on this job post. It's a totally different story. You completely change the narrative of why you want that job and why you're really keen to work at their company, because you're a user of their software. So if they happen to have some kind of software, some kind of tool, some kind of API, library, whatever, if you can build that into a project, totally changes that narrative about why you want to work there. And telling that story about why you want that job is so much more powerful than just, I want to work here because I happen to have the skill that you need and I would like a paycheck, please. Totally different story. But kind of going back to your original question, there's nothing wrong with those original sort of what you call prototypical projects. There's nothing wrong with those, especially as a first year student, totally okay. But if you can come up with something novel where you're targeting that company or building something similar to what that company does, it's a very different story when you have that conversation with them about why you want to work there. RC Maniac says in chat, I made an example that I know some coworkers or interviewers looked into my and other projects, asked about a GitHub project. See further up the comments. Let me go back through chat here a little bit. Like, where does the data come from? How do you store it and query it? How does it refresh? Yeah. So any kind of project that you can build where there was passion behind it. Like, why did you do that? I mean, I could talk about something as simple as like, hey, look, I made the lights go blinky behind me. It's like, okay, well, that's not like super compelling. But for me, it's like, it's kind of fun. It's kind of nerdy. It's a little bit engaging. If somebody follows me or raids or whatever, I can like hit a button and I make these things blink behind me just because I wanted to do something kind of fun. It's like, what sort of problem did you see? How did you solve it? Tell us about that. And so talking about these projects, again, if that project is really compelling about that particular role or that particular company, it's a much stronger sort of message to send to that company than just, yeah, I saw you had a job post and, I decided to apply for it. And I'll give you a couple of real examples. So let me pull up my own job board here and I'm just going to talk you through like some of my own examples of things that I might have said. So I applied for a job with Datadog, for example. And let me show you something else that I do on this TV back here. One sec. So there, I set the TV to Datadog. So when I go to any interview with Datadog, I put their logo on in the background. And you'd be surprised how often people connect on that Zoom call and they're like, is that our logo in the background? It's like, yeah, little subtle hint, that I really want to work there. And they're like, huh. It's just, just some little thing like that can make a big difference. Or I'll change the colors, on the wall behind me to kind of be their, their company colors or something like that. Like I got all kinds of extra lights and stuff that I can, have show up. Like there's lots of things that I can do that made that really compelling. But when I applied for a job at Datadog, they specifically asked me, why do you want to work here at Datadog? And my answer to them was, I actually applied for a job at New Relic. And I got all the way through their process. I got right to the end of their process, but unfortunately they closed their hiring. But I've been doing observability. I've been doing monitoring in my software. And this is something that I understand as a developer is really important. And as a developer relations, I also really, enjoy the education of why this is important to other people. Both as a lead dev, as an architect, as a hiring manager, I would always try to advocate for observability in our code to try to find our pain points, to try to find our bottlenecks. I understand why this is important. And so I want to be part of the team that's educating other people at a much wider scale as to why this is important. Well, you wouldn't believe how quickly I made it through their interview process of that's a really compelling story to tell. And so if you can find not just goofy ways of throwing their logo on in the background, but if you can find ways of showing them hey, I really care about this job. I really care about this company and what you do. That story becomes far more powerful when you're going through the interview process. So yeah, I made all kinds of progress on Datadog. I've actually got I've got some follow-ups with them this week. I'm doing some trying to think of when I've got I think Wednesday, someday, either Tuesday or Wednesday this week. I've got 3 tech screens as far as talking about their customers and things like that. Yeah, I've got the last couple of steps at Datadog coming up. And so being able to progress through those first couple of interviews becomes much easier because I have a very compelling story to tell about why I want that job. Why do I care about that job? Any of the other logos you saw me kind of loop through, Lacework and Stackhawk, those are both security companies. It's yeah, look at all the Log4j stuff that happened. I understand why security is a big deal. I've studied security in the background, or in the past, in my background. When I was at Turing, I wanted to teach deeper concepts about security, but it's an intro level school. We didn't have the time or the capacity to do that, but I wanted to be able to teach those things at a deeper level. That's why I really want this job, because it's going to allow me to teach that at a much larger scale. And they see that passion in me as an educator, and they're yeah, okay, let's get you through the process here. That's what we're looking for on the team. It's all how you tell that story. And so and I know that story is a lot different than a lot of folks that are trying to get developer jobs. But even as a developer, I applied for a couple of development jobs too, and they're why do you want to work here as a developer? We see you've done management, you've done developer relations. Why do you want to be an individual contributor? And my story was very similar. It's hey, I've been in tech a long time. I've seen a lot of changes. I know I have to keep up to date on a lot of things. And so I'm looking for an individual contributor role where I can bring the skill that I have, but then I'm also going to learn additional things. I'm going to learn additional sorts of deeper architecture things. I'm going to work in the cloud more at this job than I have in previous jobs. These are the things where I want to continue to grow. And again, it sends a very different message to them that you care about your own growth, but you care about what you're bringing to that company as part of that job. Let me go change my logo back. I'll be back in a sec. So anyway, that little presentation that I have running in the background, I've got tons of logos on there. And so whenever I would meet with those companies, I'd throw their logo on the background. I'd change all the lights back here to kind of be their company sort of logo and the color scheme of their company and things like that. And just little subtle things, and I actually would say that on the call. They're is that our logo? I'm yeah, it's the little subtle things like that. And they're huh. So it's fun. And, yeah, I've got the privilege of setting all this stuff up because I live stream. One person I got on a call with, I had the lights, I had the logo, and they're am I on the air right now? And they're yeah, we're live with so-and-so, welcome to the stream. And they got a big chuckle out of it. It's no, it's just, I live stream. I like helping people out. So this is just part of my normal background anyway. And they're oh, okay, cool. But it kind of breaks the ice a little bit for them because, hey, guess what? As an interviewer, I'm also nervous. I'm also nervous about interviewing you. You're not the only one that's nervous. And so anything I can do even as a candidate, I understand what the interviewer is going through. So I'm going to do what I can to break the ice and sort of build that rapport with them as well. Cool, let's go back to chat here. DevCrash says, I'm almost exclusively Python. I'm very open to learning new things. That's great. You have to be open to learning new things in tech. There's no such thing as I've learned everything about Python and that's all I ever need. You will continue to learn for sure. Nasty Nate says, I've never been an educator, but I think those skills are valuable, especially when mentoring. As you gain rank, and so this is something that I mentioned earlier when someone was asking about, like, how do you sort of progress from senior dev to like lead and architect and so on. I kind of said you have to be really good at mentoring. You have to be good at sharing your knowledge with other people so that they can level up and do their job. And as a senior level dev, I would often sit with entry level devs, intermediate level devs, and dump my brain into theirs. And that's why I loved being an educator at Turing, because I got to do that on a very wide scale, because I was already doing that as part of my job. I was already doing that on a regular basis, helping people out. And so it shows that you care about other people's growth and that you care about their success, and especially as a lead dev. And so as you progress through the ranks, like even as a junior dev, you've still got things that you can teach other people. As an intermediate dev, you've got things you can teach other people. Even as a senior dev, you've got lots more things. Like as you progress in experience, you're going to have that you can now turn around and teach to other people. It makes a big difference. And being able to describe how you do that and why you want to do that to make other people better around you. I often tell people, like in these interviews, I'm like, I love the idea of sharing knowledge. We should never silo our knowledge and feel that, oh, if I don't tell you how I do my job, then that's job security. No, that's a fool's errand. You're going to lose your job because you're not willing to share that information. You have to be open in sharing that information. As a hiring manager, I never want anyone on my team hiding information from the rest of my team. That's just, it's dangerous from a development point of view and from an organization point of view. You should never hide your knowledge. I actively seek out people that like to share their knowledge. When I do these mock interviews on interviewing.io, for example, I often tell people, like, one of the biases I carry as an interviewer is I look for people that explain why they're doing things the way that they are during a tech challenge, not just what they're doing. Like, okay, well, in this step, I'm writing out, a loop to kind of loop over some data to calculate the stats. Like, yeah, I can see that you're doing that. I'm watching you code live. I want to know why you're doing it that way. Like, tell me why you're choosing that exact implementation or that way of, like, iterating over the data or like crunching that data. Like, why are you doing it that way? When people explain that, to me, that's way more powerful in an interview, because I want other people on my team that if we sit down and pair program together, you're explaining to me why you're doing it that way so I can learn that way too. Again, that's just a bias I carry as an interviewer. Not everyone's going to feel that way, but that's something that's really important to me, both as a leader as well as like an individual contributor. I want to make sure that other people on my team are also willing to share that information with me too, because that makes for a better team. I know that if I've got a question and I come to Nasty Nate, Nate's going to tell me that information. I don't want to work with people that begrudgingly give up information. That's not a good work scenario. So I like to look for people that explain the why. Am I a CS major? I am not. Oh, DevCrush? Don't know. Yeah, DevCrush is a CS major. Cool. I'm just going to hydrate a little more. I love these interactive chats for sure. I appreciate all the questions that y'all are bringing. I do have this list of queued up questions I've been trying to get to for weeks, but you all come up with really, really great questions in chat too. So I do want to get to at least a couple of these because they've been kind of queued up for a while, and I don't want to leave people hanging for a long time. But Nate says to DevCrush, I think you'll be in demand if you're already thinking about jobs. I think so too. A lot of people are already looking at internships though, and like DevCrush's initial question, like they felt like they're a little bit late applying for the internship roles. There are companies that, tend to target like October, November. It used to be like, okay, we have an internship for April, so we need to post that in March. And then another company's like, well, we're going to post it in February, so we get better people before these other people that post in March. And then other companies would see that, oh, well, so-and-so posted in February, we're going to post in January, so we get better. And so it gets earlier and earlier and earlier for like next summer. And it always strikes me as a little odd, like, they're opening up internships for next summer in like October, November the previous year. I guess it's good if you can secure that internship like 6 months ahead of time. And so you could spend that next 6 months, doing your studies, but maybe also like getting up to speed a little bit on what you're going to need to do with that internship. But there are companies that are posting internships late. So I would, just to kind of reiterate on my answer to DevCrush, like you can still reach out to companies and find out whether they have any openings, and then reach out to the recruiters, reach out to the hiring managers, and talk to them directly about, this is where I am. I'm a first-year student. These are the skills I've been building up. These are the kinds of projects I've been working on. I'm looking for an internship role. What have you got? And you'll hear from them about that kind of stuff. But yeah, CS degree is a very good degree to get, for sure. Cool. Let's get to at least one of these questions on the queue. So someone asked a question. In a software engineering interview, if you're asked, what is your biggest weakness? Should you reply with a technical weakness you have in your skills or just a general weakness in life? I would say anybody that asks you that specific question is not asking the right question, because those kinds of questions are a little silly, to be honest. As a hiring manager, I might rephrase the question like, what are you learning? That's a much more compelling question to ask than what your biggest weakness is. I think if I can say like, hey, what are you actively learning? Like what's on your sort of to-do list for things that you want to study and things you want to learn? That's a much better question than asking you what your weakness is. In the past, I might have said something like, I used to show up late for meetings all the time. It's something that I typically share on the stream. Like I used to show up like, right at the time of the meeting or like a minute late, and then I'm like moving past people to try to find a chair to sit down at and whatever. And so what they're really asking with that kind of question is like, how did you identify the problem? How did you solve it? How are you holding yourself accountable to it so that you don't do it here? That's really what they're asking, is like, tell me something that you have grown, or tell me about an area where you have grown so that you're not going to do it here. But that's really just having you focus on a lot of negative aspects of, in this case, do you talk about technical weakness or general weakness in life? Like either way, that's not something you should be talking about in an interview. You typically don't want to talk about those kinds of things. You should always focus on what you do bring to the job, not what you don't have. Anybody asking you to highlight things you don't have for the job are asking you the wrong kinds of questions. It doesn't mean you need to like, hey, you know what? That's a bad question. I don't want to work here, and like walk away. But you can give them like some kind of vague answer and then just, send them some feedback later on. Say like, hey, some of the questions had me really focus on the negative aspects of my career, and I want to choose to talk about the positive aspects of what I do bring to the job and not necessarily focus on the negative things, in my life. And so I'm going to choose a different place to work. I would give them that feedback. If you have the luxury of like walking away from that job, not everybody will, but if that's a privilege that you have, then yeah, give them that feedback and walk away from that job. So what I would say for that kind of question, again, as a hiring manager, I would rephrase it like, what are you learning? Like, tell me about an area of growth that you've identified and how you're working on it. For me, I've got a plan of things I want to learn. Every so often I come up with a list of things that I want to learn. So right now I'm working through a Udacity program for React. I wanted to learn React. Does it mean I want to become a React developer? No, not at all. But I know it's an important skill to have. And especially if I'm doing DevRel, I'm going to be interacting with people that work in React. I have to know what they're talking about. And so it's just something where I recognize like, hey, this is a gap in my technical skill that I wanted to learn. And then as far as like long-term career growth, I wanted to focus on architecture again, specifically cloud architecture. And so I'm studying for the AWS Architecture Associate certification. And when I get that, I'm going to do the same for Google. And when I get that, I'm going to do the same for Azure, because I want to be able to speak intelligently about what the three major cloud platforms offer as far as architecture goes. Because again, it's going to make me a better developer. It's going to make me a better communicator. I'm going to be better at talking to customers about what their needs are, because I'm going to have a deeper understanding of those platforms. And so for me, the question of what's your biggest weakness, I mean, I might highlight a technical weakness of like, you know what, I've been away from front end too long, and so I've chosen to enroll in this program. And the reason that I chose Udacity specifically is because it's paid, and so it gives me a deeper motivation to do it. It's got a timeline on it. I have deadlines to meet, and it's got sort of written curriculum as well as specific projects already made. I just have to follow the curriculum. I have to build the projects. I know I'm going to get good feedback from them, and I'm paying them for that, and that's okay. And so whether you want to talk about a technical weakness or a just a personal weakness, I think it would depend a little bit on what you really want to admit to them. But I would phrase it as like, try to think of an area of growth and how you're acting on that. And so for me, I would, like I've actually brought up in a couple of interviews, like I'm learning React because I recognized there was a gap in my skill. And it doesn't necessarily mean I want to become a React developer, but it is something that I know is important in the industry. And it's something that I wanted to learn more about so that, I have a better appreciation for what goes on in that world. But it doesn't mean I'm planning to become a front-end developer by any means. So that would be how I would answer that question. DevCrush asked in chat, how much emphasis should I put on the language of a job description? Some that I've read concern me with the laundry list of responsibilities or prior knowledge expectations, but I've been telling myself to apply anyway and sort it out later. Those job descriptions are really like my birthday wish list. I hope I find somebody that matches all of that stuff, but the chances I actually find somebody that matches all that stuff is pretty much zero. Any good job description is going to have, these are the required skills. These are the skills you absolutely must have in order to get a job here. These other skills are like really nice to have, and they're like bonus points if you're applying. If you only have like one or two of the required and have a whole bunch of the, nice to haves, they'll probably interview you. If you've got none of the required skills, they may not even interview you. It's kind of at the discretion of the company. But if they just write it all as like, these are the required skills, I would say usually the first, like the top couple of skills are really what they consider the most crucial, critical skills that you must have. And that's typically where they'll talk about the language and maybe a framework or just general concept, like really good API design or something like that. Like I would say whatever the top like 3 or 4 things are, those are probably what they're considering. Like these are our required skills. Like you must have these. But I would say if they're writing up the job description in a way where it all looks like everything is required, I would say if you match even a couple of them, I would apply anyway, especially, for DevCrush. You're still in college. You've just wrapped up your first year. You're wrapping up your first year. They're going to look at your background and go, okay, you're new in the industry. You're not going to have a lot of this information, and it's fine. Like if they interview you, then they know kind of your level of skill anyway. And so you can just continue to kind of work with them on that. If they don't call, then, you didn't meet enough of that criteria. I don't know that there's a hard and fast answer about like, if you match 40%, you should apply, or if you match 80%, you should apply, because there's definitely some data to kind of back that up, where white men in tech will tend to apply for a job if they match like between 20 and 40% of a job description. Men in general will typically do like 30 to 50%, but historically marginalized people in tech, they'll tend to only apply for those jobs if they feel they meet like 80% or more. And that stinks, in my opinion, because I think the tech industry needs a lot more diversity, and I think that people should be applying for these jobs anyway. Just go apply for the job. Now, if it's something like we require you to have 5 years of experience and you're still a first-year college student, that's a very different thing. But if it's just a list of technical skills, then your cover letter and your resume should highlight the skills that you do have that they do list in that job requirement. But don't say anything in your cover letter, don't say anything in the resume about the skills you don't have that they were looking for on that job description. So I would say, like, if I'm looking for a JavaScript developer that knows JavaScript and you've worked in API design, in DevCrush's case, they've done Python, maybe they haven't done JavaScript, maybe they haven't done API design, then your resume should promote yourself as a Python developer, and your cover letter should talk a lot about like, I've been studying Python, these are the projects that I've worked on in Python, and let them make the determination of whether or not to interview you. But don't say like, hey, I know the job description said JavaScript and API design, but I'm only a first-year student, so I haven't done any of that yet. You don't have to tell them any of that. And when they call you on the phone and they say, why do you want this job? You can say, I've got some, I bring some Python experience to the team, and there's opportunity for me to learn even more. And so I'm really excited at the opportunity for what the company does. And I'm really excited to continue to learn and expand my growth and get into some other technologies that I haven't studied yet, where I'm really excited to continue to learn. And so you can just bring that to the interview. You don't have to talk about the things you don't have. Talk about what you do have and that you're excited for what you don't have. But don't start going down the list of like, oh yeah, let's read through that job description. Don't have that, don't have that, don't have that, don't have that. Like, don't bring that stuff up. Let them figure that out during the interview process, but at least get into their interview process. RC Maniac, kind of going back to a previous question, said for the biggest weakness, talk about things like I had like this issue, but this is how I got past it and improved myself so it wasn't an issue in the future. Yeah, it really comes down to how did you identify it? How did you solve it? How are you holding yourself accountable to not let it be an issue in the future? Anyway, Dev Crush, I hope that that helped you on that question that you had. But great question. I typically tell people, like, if you match even a couple of the things on the list, go ahead and apply for the job. If you're comfortable enough with what you do have in that job description to speak to it in an interview, I would say apply for that job anyway and let them figure it out from there. Cool. Again, if you're watching on LinkedIn, you can leave some comments on LinkedIn. I didn't see whether anybody in the Twitch chat actually went over to LinkedIn to try to leave some comments. So I don't know whether anybody's actually left comments on LinkedIn or not. The LinkedIn UI doesn't do a great job at showing me the comments that people are leaving. So I don't know whether anybody's actually left comments. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, if you could go ahead and just drop a comment on the video, just to let me know you're there, that'd be really helpful. And then same with Facebook. If you're on Facebook and you want to leave a comment, you will need to follow the page at facebook.com/techinterview.guide. But if you follow, you can leave a comment there. But if you want your question to show up in the panel over here as part of the interface itself, then you'll need to come over to Twitch. It's just twitch.tv/IanDouglas736. I did want to rebrand to Twitch TV/techinterviewguide, but Twitch will not help me with that. Which is kind of awful. I don't want to have to start telling like 300 plus followers like, hey, go follow this other account and then switch over to that other account. That's annoying. I would rather just keep this channel going. So it's disappointing that they wouldn't help swap a couple of usernames like that. But it is what it is. All right, well, let's go through some more of these queued up questions. And see what else that we can sort of do here. And like I said, if you send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter and ask me a question there, I will generally ask that anonymously, like I did this last question, where I don't say the person's name. In this case, they specifically said I could say their name. So this person named Sean asked a question and said, what are some good online web development tests, certifications, or licenses that would give me a higher probability of having an interview? It depends a little bit on the company and the kinds of roles where you want to apply. There are different kinds of jobs out there, and those different kinds of jobs will look at certifications differently. Some companies just ignore certifications altogether. And I know hiring managers and recruiters that they don't care what kind of certification you have. Unless it's like a really big name, like degree or certification or something from like a really well-known entity. But if it's just like, Uncle Bob's cybersecurity shack, and they give you a certification in something, like that doesn't mean anything to anybody. And so it does need to be like a fairly well-known name. And so I would say the kinds of certifications that would give you at least a better chance of getting the first couple of interviews would be anything from like major companies like AWS, Google, Microsoft, as far as like their cloud products. Those are really, really big. Looking at programs like Udacity is a well-known name in the tech industry. So any of their sort of nano degree programs, or even some of the free programs that they have, they've got a bunch of free material too. But if you just have like a certificate from like a Udemy class that you paid $10 for, it's probably not going to guarantee you an interview or even increase your chances of getting an interview, but it will stand out. Like I don't want to make it sound like it's completely pointless going and doing those kinds of other things. Even Free Code Camp is a good one. Like a lot of people respect their curriculum. They've done a really good job sort of curating their curriculum as well. I think that having those things on your resume will definitely stand out because you wanted to learn a skill, you started something, and you finished it. That's what a lot of hiring managers are going to be looking for there. Just the fact that you started something and finished it. What that curriculum actually was depends a little bit. And it's not going to be as vital as far as like what the certification is, just the fact that you did do it. So yeah, I would say like any of the AWS certifications, Microsoft certifications, Google certifications, those are always going to look really good because those are, high brand name kinds of things. Same thing with like the security certifications. I don't know a lot of them off the top of my head, like is it the CompTIA? Like some of those types of like major brand certifications. And then from there, I would look at like Udacity, nanodegree programs, things like that, where it's like a well-known name or like a school or something like that, where you did like a certificate program or something like that. Again, it really just comes down to what did you want to learn? Why did you want to learn it? And the fact that you started and finished is really what's going to stand out there. But if it's like kind of a no-name brand or like a lesser known brand, putting on the resume isn't going to hurt you by any means, but it may not help. But it's certainly not going to hurt you to list them on there. So hopefully that'll help out there. Nate says, I did the Udacity Android Nano degree in 2017. That's how I started, or late 2016. I started one of their Android programs kind of around that same time, and I never finished it. I started it, but I never finished it. I realized partway through, it's like, yeah, tinkering with Android's kind of fun, but it's not where I wanted to take my career, so I stopped it. And some other ones I started and stopped just more because life got busy and I didn't have time. Like I wanted to do their data analyst and their data engineering programs, and I wanted to do them at the same time because I figured if I'm getting into the data stuff, I might as well do them at the same time and just knock them both out. But then I kind of realized like partway through, it's like, okay, I like doing, ELTs and stuff like that with data, but visualization and stuff just wasn't as interesting to me. Or going through like the deep statistics and calculations and stuff. It's like, yeah, it's neat, but not where I wanted to take my career. So I ended those two. So, yeah. So Nate says they are good. They are good programs at Udacity. I agree. I have a lot of respect for Udacity because it's very structured curriculum. They have good projects. They're relevant projects. And you know that you're going to get code feedback from the people who are kind of going through and grading your code. They may not always give you like top quality, like here's how to improve it, but they'll be able to give you some idea of like, hey, these are some ways that you could make this better. Or if it doesn't meet their criteria, their rubric, they'll explain why. And they like to highlight portions of the code and say like, hey, there's a better way that you can do like this part of your code. Like the people that give those reviews are really good at giving the reviews so that you can go back and improve things. So yeah, I have a lot of trust for Udacity as well. I think they do a pretty good job. Cool. I did see a couple of other people drop on to the LinkedIn stream. I saw the viewer counter tick up, but I didn't see any comments. So I don't know whether anybody from Twitch tried to go over to LinkedIn to leave a comment or not. But yeah, I'm a little concerned about LinkedIn not showing me the comments. Something that I'm going to have to sort of tinker with, I think, and see what's going on. And nobody on Facebook has left any comments at all. I may change the setting in Facebook for next time and just say like anybody can leave a comment. You don't necessarily have to follow the page. But I figured if I made people follow the page on Facebook, I'd at least get some new followers on Facebook at least. But Facebook hasn't been like great as far as the engagement of the tech interview guide stuff anyway. Dev Crush says that you did pop in, prefer to remain anonymous. Yeah, that's fine. No worries. Cool. All right. Happy to take any other questions. I can continue to go through my queued up questions. But if anybody else has other questions they want to ask, definitely drop those in chat as you go. Just trying to think of like what are some good ones Like some of these questions I've answered on previous streams, like what's the strangest question you've heard during a job interview? Is there a benefit to getting points in LeetCode? I would say as a hiring manager, I don't care so much about the points that you've done on LeetCode. The fact that you spent time on LeetCode and that you care about data structures and algorithms stands out to me. But I'm also of a mind that LeetCode problems have a time and a place in the interview process, but that the questions that you get asked as a technical challenge should not come directly from LeetCode, and they need to be very in line with what you do as a company. I am a big proponent of not giving just a random LeetCode problem just for the sake of giving you a LeetCode problem. It needs to be like whatever technical challenge you have a candidate do in an interview, it needs to be tied to your business. It needs to be relevant to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. I've done some interviews over the past 4 weeks, where it's been like, hey, go like show me in Python how you're going to hit this API, grab some JSON data, and calculate some statistics out of that data. Like as soon as they gave me that as a technical challenge, I'm like, that's amazing. Like I totally want to do this project. Like, and it was a paired project. Like they were watching me code. Sorry, it wasn't paired. They were just watching me do the technical challenge, but it was completely relevant to what they do because it was kind of a slimmed down version of the data that they would grab to build their own dashboard product. And so when their front end hit the backend API endpoint, they expected that backend API endpoint to go grab some data, calculate some statistics, and hand it off to the front end. And I'm like, this is brilliant. This is exactly like what my day-to-day is going to be. And so I was able to show them, okay, well, let me pull up the request library in Python, and here's how I'm going to fetch this. And I would talk about like, hey, for the sake of the technical challenge, I'm not going to worry too much about like edge cases like the endpoint is down or something like that. But I would be accounting for things like rate limiting and whether I get a 400 or a 500 series error so that I can give my user a good experience and at least give them some kind of response back. And they're like, okay, cool, noted. So just being able to talk about things that you would do, but I would say like, hey, just to get started, I'm just going to do what we call happy path, where I make sure I'm going to build my code as if this thing is indestructible. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be online. It's always going to give me data. And we're just going to go with that for now. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. So just being able to at least explain that those are things that on the job you would actually account for. And then I grabbed the content and we talked about like, one of them was like calculating the average and calculating the mean. And I'm like, hey, could you refresh my mind? It's been like 25 years since I did a statistics class. Like, what's the difference between them? And they're like, oh, the average is where you add them all up and divide it by the count. And the mean is where if they were all in an array, like what's the middle element of the array? It's like, oh yeah, that's right. And I'm like, cool. All right, I can solve this. And I went through and I like tabulated everything up and they're like, all right, great. We're going to move on to the next stage of the interview. Like I did well enough that they wanted to move forward with it. But it was so relevant to the median. It was so relevant to what they did day to day on the job. It was so much better than like, do this heap problem, or do this, depth first search kind of problem from LeetCode. To me, as a hiring manager, there's not a lot of benefit to seeing those points on LeetCode, other than the fact that you've had the time and the privilege and the capacity to just do nothing but sit on LeetCode and grind problem after problem after problem. Being able to go through those data structures, fine. Being able to go through those algorithms, fine. Can you do my job on a day-to-day basis? Like grinding LeetCode isn't going to tell you squat about going into Python and using the request library and getting rate limited when you hit an API. LeetCode is not going to help you with that. LeetCode is not going to help you with like calculating these kinds of statistics based on this JSON data that may be missing out of the JSON data. Like in some cases, the data wasn't there. How do you account for that? LeetCode's not going to help you with that. So LeetCode problems need to be at least chosen to be relevant to what they're going to be doing on the job on a day-to-day basis. But don't just pull some random question off of LeetCode. That's not helpful to anybody, other than finding people who do nothing but grind on LeetCode. And I got a bunch of YouTubes on like how to shortcut that LeetCode process. So if you really want to go through LeetCode, you can go check out my YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Ian Douglas. You can definitely just search my videos for the word LeetCode, and you'll see a bunch of things on like how to shortcut the grind and how to reverse engineer LeetCode problems. And it gets into things like pseudocode and whatnot. So if you really have, feel like you have to do LeetCode, fine, go grind on LeetCode. But as a hiring manager, I don't give a rip about LeetCode. If I'm hiring for a job, I'm not even going to go look at your LeetCode profile. I promise. I'm not, I don't care about LeetCode. That's how much I don't care. I'm not even going to go look at your profile to find out how many points you have on LeetCode. It's not important to my company because it's not going to prepare you for the day-to-day stuff that you're going to be doing on the job. It's preparing you for a different kind of thing. It's preparing you to really analyze, how you write an algorithm, and it's going to help you talk about big O notation and things like that, which is fine. There's a time and a place for that, but it's not going to help you on the day-to-day job, in my opinion. And so that's why I think a lot of companies are doing it wrong when it comes to tech interviews. They need to shape and create tech interview processes which are more in line with what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. That's my hot take on that. So what's the benefit of getting points in LeetCode? To me, absolutely nothing. Some companies may care about your LeetCode score. Those companies are probably doing it wrong. Cool. Me too. Good to see you in chat. Thanks for dropping in chat for the first time. Me too asks, were they allowed to use Google? I feel like knowing how to Google efficiently is just as important to the role. Nobody's going to know everything. I think code challenges that fail to acknowledge that as part of the job are not truly evaluating one's capabilities. That's a good point too. I've certainly done some interviews recently where I got stuck on something and I told the interviewer hey, I can go look this up. Or if you happen to know, just to kind of get me over this bump or whatever. Sometimes interviewers will be like, hey, those parameters are in the wrong order or something like that. Then sometimes interviewers are willing to kind of jump in and help you out. But if I'm in an interview with somebody and they say hey, do you mind if I go look up this documentation? Especially if I can't see their screen, then I would say you can look up the documentation, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to describe what you're Googling. I want you to describe how you're evaluating the first couple of links to determine which one you're actually going to go look at. And then I want you to tell me on that page what you're finding on that page that's going to help you. Because again, that's how I would evaluate how well do you Google. If I can see your screen, if you're doing some sort of screen share and I can see that you're actually just pulling up a browser and you're going to Google things, then I can just kind of track that along. But I actually did a live interview one time where it was at SendGrid, and the person was coding, they were getting stuck on something, and they're like, hey, do you mind if I look up some documentation real quick? I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to grab a drink. And so I turned my chair to go grab a drink. And it took me a second. And when I turned back around, they didn't look up the documentation. They were on Stack Overflow trying to look up the solution to the problem I gave them. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, you told me you were going to look up documentation, not look up the answer. And they're like, oh, I thought I'd just, kind of get a rough idea. So I'm like, no, the point of this is that you would come up with how to solve the problem, not that you're going to go use Stack Overflow to solve the problem. Yes, that is what we do on a day-to-day basis. Let's be honest. But I want to know that you can solve the problem by only looking at documentation. There's a big difference there. And so I agree with me too. There is a time and a place to evaluate somebody's skill of how do you go find an answer that you don't know. But you want to make sure that they're not using something like Stack Overflow where they see how somebody else solved that exact problem, as opposed to, I'm just stuck on this part of the documentation on how to use this internal API to sort an array or something like that. It's fine, go look up the documentation for that, but don't go look up how to sort the data for the problem that I just gave you specifically, because I don't want you go looking up the answer. That completely defeats the purpose. So anyway, yeah, good point there. Me too. I agree with that. There is a time and a place to sort of test how that goes. And I talked a little bit on the last stream or last Sunday. I think it was last Sunday. I was talking about a company called Workiva, and I'll drop their name in chat here. They actually have a really good technical interview process that I really like. And they break it down into three parts. One is, can you read this code? One is, can you debug the code? And the third one is, can you write the code? And so the first one is like, here's a block of code, describe what it's doing. And so you have to kind of look through the code to see what's going on. The second one is, can you debug it? It's really looking at, okay, here's a block of code that doesn't work. How do you find out where the problem is, and then how do you fix it? And then the third part is actually getting into a technical challenge of like, okay, you've got like a bare bones sort of skeleton or scaffold sort of put together, and we need you to write a method that like finishes the work. And I really like that process. I think it's also very informative about like, what do you know about the language? What do you know about the technology? How do you go find those answers if you don't know? But also like, what's your debugging process? Like, how would you actually start to debug when code doesn't work? That's a really important part of doing a technical challenge, especially for a developer. Show me how you fix something. Or, you know, it can help a little bit when you're looking at you know, you give someone a tech challenge and their code doesn't work. Then you can kind of go into debug mode and say, hey, that doesn't work, that's fine. How would you figure out why that didn't work? Like, talk me through the process of how you're going to figure out how to make this work, or why it didn't work, like what actually happened here. And get them to talk you through that, because that's also part of me evaluating your technical skill, is how are you going to fix a problem when a problem happens, because they're going to happen. So yeah, great point. Me too. Thanks for bringing that up. Cool. Well, I think I'm going to wrap up. We've been going about almost 2 hours now. Wow, time flies. I did start a little early just because I wanted to stream on multiple platforms. And let's talk about Eric coming in on Thursday again. Let me pull up his profile here, LinkedIn. All right, I'm going to drop Eric's profile in here just a little bit early, but Eric's going to be on the stream on Thursday. I'm excited to kind of hear about his background. He's a lead Android developer at Kaiser Permanente, and he's been helping people out in meetups and on Twitter around interview prep and things as well. So I wanted to get Eric on the stream just so we can hear someone else's perspective. Again, I don't want it to just be my perspectives on the stream all the time. You know, I've certainly got perspectives and ideas on things, but I also want to use my platform to give other people a voice too. So if you're watching this later on LinkedIn, if you're watching it later on Facebook, if you're watching it on YouTube later on, because I put all these up on YouTube, like and subscribe, by the way. If you ever want to be on the stream, drop me a message. I'm happy to have other people on the stream. So drop me a line. Let me know you want to be on the stream, and we can chat about topics and things like that. Get to know you a little bit, you know, I definitely want to fill out the schedule a little bit more and have people on the stream on a regular basis. So if you're interested in being on the stream, drop me a line. Let me know. Aside from that, I think we'll kind of wind down for the night. Hope you all have a good week. If you do have other questions, you can send it to me on LinkedIn. You can send it to me on Twitter, or whisper me on here on Twitch. Same username on all three of those platforms, Ian Douglas 736. You can reach out on Facebook. It's facebook.com/techinterview.guide. If you do have questions, you can always drop me a line. You can also email me at the website, just ian.douglas@techinterview.guide. You can drop me an email anytime. If you want a resume review, I will do resume reviews from time to time. I will typically do those on Sundays, unless the guest I have on a Thursday is like an engineering manager or an HR person or recruiter. Then I will probably get them to help me with a resume review on a Thursday. Otherwise, I'm going to reserve those for Sundays. But if you want a resume review, you can upload it at techinterview.guide/streaming. Happy to do resume reviews for free for folks. I was going to get to one tonight, but just for the sake of time, we ended up with a bunch of questions and I didn't get to it. So I will try to do one. I'll see. Let's see. Eric's a principal engineer. I might get Eric to help me with that resume review on Thursday. We'll see. I'll take a look at the resume and see what kind of background the person has and whether Eric would be a good one to do a review. But I'm sure Eric would have just opinions in general around resume format and things like that too. So we'll maybe get to that one on Thursday. Aside from that, have a great week, everyone. Reach out anytime you have a question. If there's anything I can ever help with, you can send me messages and I'm happy to help out. Otherwise, have a great week. Stay safe, stay warm. If you're somewhere cold, if you're somewhere warm, stay cool, stay hydrated, and we'll catch you on Thursday. See you, folks.